The cops have just shown up. Not sure what's going on yet.
In June, activists with Atlanta's Stop Cop City movement gathered to honor one of their own. It had been 6 months since officers killed Manuel Esteban Pais Terán, known as Tortuguita. The 26-year-old environmental activist was part of a movement to stop a police training center from being built in a city forest. Protesters call it Cop City.
The vigil for Tortuguita was about to start, and a couple dozen police officers just showed up, telling people they have to leave the park by tonight.
The park closed at 11, and everybody got to be out at 11.
In the months before Tortuguita's killing, authorities in Georgia launched a crackdown on the movement, characterizing it as a violent extremist organization. And in September, 61 people were charged in a wide-ranging racketeering case and accused of conspiring to stop the construction of the training center.
The defendants are members of Defend the Atlanta Forest, an anarchist, anti-police, and anti-business extremist organization.
Most of them are also facing state domestic terrorism charges, the first such cases in Georgia's history.
The state repression, the crackdown on even lawful political activities is so severe. That is unprecedented.
That means any person moving forward that dissents in any way, just sleeping in a hammock, now you're a terrorist and your life is over.
The basis for the domestic terror charges are things like wearing camo, having a jail support number written on their arm, having mud on their clothing.
It doesn't take a rocket scientist or an attorney to tell you that breaking windows and setting fires is not protest. That is terrorism.
There's a lot of concern by legal rights groups, civil liberties advocates about these charges.
I do believe that the proper actions are being done to protect the citizens of the city, to protect this project.
La lucha sigue. Tortuguita vive. Tortuguita vive.
Tortuguita's mother traveled from Panama to attend the vigil. Keeping close watch, police circled the park as she spoke.
The police are the ones that are creating the terror.
So do you think that attitude, characterizing the people in the forest as domestic terrorists, had something to do with Manuel being killed that day?
This crew of police were prepared to kill somebody.
We traveled to Atlanta to examine the case against the Stop Cop City movement and what it could mean for the future of protest in the United States.
It's political suppression at its core, and that's terrifying.
Occupants inside the green or red tent, please step out with your hands up. This is the Atlanta Police Department.
On the morning of January 18th, 2023, several law enforcement agencies in Georgia conducted a raid in a forest in southeast Atlanta. Protesters had camped in the woods for months to protect a chunk of the land from being bulldozed to build a $90 million police training center.
So I was sleeping in a hammock with my partner at the time. We woke up around like 8, maybe quarter till 8 in the morning.
Sarah Wasilewski had traveled from Pittsburgh to Atlanta and joined the protest for the weekend.
So we were just laying in bed talking, and then all of a sudden we heard and saw just like 15 or so police in full military like combat gear, like with AR-15s just like coming through the woods directly at us. We were waiting to be put into a transport vehicle, and that's when I heard gunshots. I screamed when I heard it, and the police officer that like had me also responded like, oh, like they knew something bad happened.
While Sarah was being arrested, a team of officers killed Tortuguita in a barrage of gunfire.
They make 57 holes in his body. Some of the bullets break the bones.
Authorities claim Tortuguita fired first, wounding a state trooper in the abdomen, and that a pistol allegedly registered to Tortuguita was recovered from the scene. They say there's no footage of the actual shooting, just recordings from officers who were nearby. That footage has raised questions about who actually shot the trooper.
I really don't believe anything what they say. I think they are lying. And there is nothing new. Everybody knows that police lie.
The county medical examiner didn't find any gunshot residue on Tortuguita's hands. And an independent autopsy suggests that Tortuguita was shot while seated with hands raised.
Manuel really was pacifist. He disliked the police very much, but not to kill anybody or to try to kill anybody. Manuel's life and message is to save the world, to save the green areas, to take care of the oceans.
In Manuel's case, what would you like the police to do?
What I want them to do, to release information. To kill somebody like this is not for protecting anybody. This was, they was terrorist. They were treating like a terrorist.
The Georgia Bureau of Investigation says the case is being investigated and won't release any further information. They denied our request for an interview. In official reports of the deadly raid, police indicated that they believed the protesters in the forest were dangerous and often referred to them as domestic terrorists.
That's why Tortuguita was murdered, because I believe that the police thought that they were being faced with dangerous criminals, and I think that they were hyped up to be ready to go.
Sarah was charged that day with domestic terrorism under Georgia's state law. A conviction could mean decades in prison.
That would ruin my life, just because I was sleeping in the woods in a hammock. And like, I have faith that that won't happen, but it could. And that's very scary. Sorry.
Sarah's arrest warrant says her only offense was trespassing in the woods to support the aims of Defend the Atlanta Forest, which it claims the U.S. Department of Homeland Security considers to be a violent extremist group. But that's not true. DHS told us that it doesn't even classify any group like that. Still, authorities in Georgia allege it's a criminal organization that has taken responsibility for acts of vandalism, sabotage, and assaults on police.
The U.S. legal system does not allow guilt by association. You are not guilty of a crime because you participated in a movement.
Lauren Regan specializes in constitutional law and has represented activists in court for 2 decades.
It appears that the state is attempting to criminalize the political movement itself instead of the individual. That is unprecedented.
In September, Georgia's Attorney General brought racketeering, or RICO, charges against Sarah and 60 others.
We contend that this group has actively recruited and trained others from Georgia, around the country, and across the globe to participate in this criminal enterprise.
Racketeering charges mean Sarah will be prosecuted alongside others accused of illegal acts, even if she didn't participate herself. The indictment accuses her of bringing camouflage and camping gear into the woods in furtherance of the conspiracy.
It's pretty absurd to think that we're dangerous terrorists. I'm just a person sleeping in the woods. And like, that's a form of protest, right? It's like some hippies in the woods that don't want a forest to be torn down. It's not what the police want you to think.
The Atlanta Public Safety Training Center, or Cop City, is being built in the South River Forest, one of the largest green spaces in Atlanta. The forest is also known as Wilani, its original Muskogee name. The city says police will train there, along with the fire department.
This is where Cop City is being built. You can see a large swath of the Willani forest has already been cleared, and all around the park there's a very heavy police presence with cop cars and barricades blocking all the entrances to the park, and they're making their presence known.
The project is partly funded by the Atlanta Police Foundation. It's an influential private nonprofit overseen by executives from some of the biggest corporations in the country, like Wells Fargo, AT&T, and Delta Airlines.
They have unchecked authority to give police militarized equipment.
Matthew Johnson is a reverend and activist in Atlanta.
So it's really a project driven by moneyed and corporate interests. And the Atlanta Police Foundation is where they funnel that money through.
But what do these corporations stand to gain from Cop City?
A police state that protects their moneyed interests. That's what it comes down to, and that's what they're building the capacity for.
Cop City was announced in 2021 to immediate backlash, and a decentralized movement to oppose it quickly formed.
Why would anyone in their right mind want to build this thing? Because in 2020, tens of millions of working people took to the streets to protest against the racist police murders of George Floyd.
Environmental racism is a literal thing, and it's not hard to read about.
It's going to destroy our watershed.
As a military veteran, I know what militarization looks like.
Please make sure that you understand that this is just not a vote for us. These are our lives.
Cutting down a forest in a black neighborhood in the middle of a climate catastrophe. And they're continuing to militarize the police and arrest more people. And it's the people that are talking about investing in social services that are considered the extremists. These people are living in a delusion.
Emails obtained by the Atlanta Community Press Collective show that the head of the police foundation and a city official had been referring to the protesters as terrorists months before those charges were used.
I think the worst accusations that have been made were things like throwing rocks at police, burning ATVs or construction equipment. You identify those individuals and you charge them with crimes, whether that's arson or criminal mischief. Atlanta attempted to round up both lawful and unlawful activists in the hope of basically scaring people into submission.
In March, dozens opposing the construction of Cop City drove police from the worksite with rocks and fireworks and set fire to construction equipment. Police responded by raiding a nearby music festival, alleging the attackers hid in the crowd. Matthew's friend, Victor Puertas, was chased by police and arrested.
Hey, what are you chasing him for? Yeah, what the hell are you doing? You're gonna hurt him! Let him go!
Victor was one of 23 charged with domestic terrorism that day. He's also been indicted in the same racketeering case as Sarah and dozens of others. The state alleges that Victor joined a mob designed to overwhelm the police force and cause property damage. He's being held at an immigrant detention center about 2 hours outside of Atlanta and facing deportation back to Peru. Matthew and other clergy organized a bus ride of supporters.
On our way to the ICE detention facility, we passed by a firehouse and we saw the mayor, Andre Dickens, the mayor of Atlanta, giving what appears to be a press conference. Matthew and some of the others insisted the bus turn around so we can go down and talk to him.
Let's go! Sharon is here and she can't be with her son ever again in life.
Thank you for everything you do.
Councilman Winston, Councilman Westmoreland, Mayor Dickless, where are you? They're supporting you. They're giving money to cops so they can kill people who look like you.
When Belkis Tehran's son was murdered, all you had to say was that kids die every day.
The mayor ignored the interruption and finished the press conference.
Get your hands off of me.
Mr. Mayor.
You best to move back.
Why are you supporting the training facility in the face of such public opposition?
Will you speak out against the murder of George Anita or not? 57 shots. 57 shots. Somebody say something.
Nobody's gonna stop this movement. So I am in and I will continue.
Good.
And I understand that they don't listen if you don't shout. I understand that too.
But I couldn't look at you in the face if I didn't say something.
They are overprotecting themselves because they think that we are terrorists, and we are not. Nobody's a terrorist here.
After weeks of negotiations with the detention center, we were able to speak to Victor by video call.
Hello.
Hi, Victor.
This is the first time he's spoken to the media since his arrest.
It feels like you're living a completely parallel life, you know, like your life stopped the moment that you got arrested, and now you have to make meaning of all this, you know.
And why is this movement so important to you, Victor?
I care about the land, I care about the people, I care about life, I care about the water, you know, I deeply care about those things. I grew up in that way, I was raised in that way.
So what do you think it does to a movement when the state labels it as a violent extremist organization and then charges its participants, like you, with domestic terrorism?
You know, you don't believe it first, you know, and then you realize, yeah, actually they're like passing these kind of laws, you know, to targeting certain groups of people. What's happening here in Georgia, in Atlanta, you know, it will have a repercussion all over the country.
In May, Georgia expanded the scope of its crackdown. A SWAT team raided the home offices of the Atlanta Solidarity Fund, a nonprofit that helps arrested activists post bail and find attorneys.
They had come expecting to be raiding a terrorist cell. That was one of the most terrifying experiences of my life.
Many Stop Cop City protesters, like Sarah, relied on the bail fund to cover hefty bond fees for them to get out of jail.
It wasn't because we broke any laws. It wasn't because we hurt anybody. It was because we threatened a specific political agenda of very powerful city and state government officials.
Marlon Kautz and 2 others were charged with money laundering and charity fraud, and later indicted in the RICO case along with dozens of other Stop Cop City activists. State prosecutors alleged that the fund was misusing donations to finance the occupation of the forest. Some of the evidence cited are reimbursements for cooking supplies and yard signs.
Prosecutors aren't even trying to claim that the people who they've arrested and charged have specifically done anything violent. The affidavits rather allege that they are a member of an organization, and that the organization is responsible for various crimes. This is a very powerful and dangerous approach for prosecutors to take, because it effectively criminalizes political association.
We sat down for an interview with the chief of police to ask about these charges.
We have individuals from across the country that have come here for an issue that they want to become involved in. And so it concerns me when police officers are targeted. We've had police precincts firebombed. We've had police cars set on fire, officers attacked with rocks and fireworks, and that's very concerning.
Can you explain how actions like those, how do they rise above criminal damage to property to the level of terrorism?
Certainly, and I would say, look at the statute. The state of Georgia has statutes that cover a range of criminal acts. The only way that we're able to charge anyone is if a judge agrees.
We looked at some of these arrest warrants and then rely on evidence such as camping in the forest or wearing camouflage, saying that this affirms the person's cooperation with the movement. Does it concern you that people are being charged with this very hefty crime based in this kind of way?
We are fortunate that we do not live in a society where the police alone determine what the charge is and the police alone prosecute. For there to be a charge, a judge has to agree and a prosecutor has to agree.
Are you concerned at all that this is the first time in Georgia's history that people are being charged with domestic terrorism?
We're not going to answer that.
Okay.
Right next to the Attorney General.
Okay.
The Attorney General's office did not respond to our request for an interview.
They don't have to get convictions in order to punish activists and in order to try to deter others. They get what they want just by the arrest and the charge. Their primary goal was to crush the social justice movement, to stop people from showing up, to stop protests, and to allow Cop City to be built.
For prosecutors to indict a group with racketeering, individuals first need to be charged with an underlying crime. Most of those named in the state's RICO case were charged with domestic terrorism under Georgia state law. It was passed in 2017 and defines property destruction as an act of terrorism if it was intended to change public policy.
The domestic terror law was intended to criminalize acts like those of the Pulse nightclub, the Boston Marathon, Dylan Roof, but the statutes are being written so broadly, and they really become a catch-all for the pet projects of whatever legislators are kind of pushing the legislation through.
Georgia State Senator Bill Cowsert sponsored the domestic terror law.
There's been over 40 who have been charged since December. Are these the types of people you envisioned would be targeted under this law?
Absolutely. This is not somebody marching with a sign, trying to prove a point. These are violent demonstrations and attacks on an attempt to build a center to train law enforcement so they can better protect and serve the public.
No one has been killed in any of these demonstrations except for a protester who was shot by the police.
If somebody blew up a bomb in the Atlanta airport and didn't kill anybody, it would shut down air travel in the United States and probably worldwide. It's the power grid, it's the transportation system, it's the healthcare system, it's the educational system, and in this case that you've brought up today, it's the law enforcement system. Was this for the type of activity
and you've given
yeah.
a number of examples, power grids, bombs going off. None of this has happened.
Right.
Do you think it's reasonable for someone to face 35 years in prison for property crime where no one is injured?
Yeah, that impacts society greatly and harms a vast number of people. So we do think it was an appropriate punishment.
We interviewed one of those who was charged with domestic terrorism. She says she did nothing more than camp in a hammock in the forest, yet she's now facing domestic terrorism charges, which carry a sentence of up to 35 years. Are you not worried that this law is being used to criminalize political association?
If those actions that they've taken do not amount to domestic terrorism, then I believe that either the prosecutors or the judges will exonerate these individuals.
Around 150 protesters gathered in June to try to re-enter the forest. But they only marched a few hundred meters before deciding the risk was too high.
We decided to stop because the situation is kind of crazy, right? But our enemy is treating us like terrorists. And so we have to figure out how we're gonna win, because we intend to win.
Stop the charges! Stop the charges!
The racketeering case could drag through the courts for years. And regardless of the outcome, police and prosecutors have a new legal playbook to punish activists and stall movements. In the meantime, Cop City is scheduled to be completed in 2024.
Stop Cop City! Stop Cop City!
Organizers hope to force a referendum in which voters choose if the training center should be built. And despite the stakes, they are calling on others to come to Atlanta to shut construction down.
This is the legacy of Manuel, to top Cop City, but at the same time, we save Willany. I call all the forest defenders in the world to join us.
How do you feel about going to protests now? Are you afraid of participating?
I mean, it's made me even more afraid. Just that people can be murdered or arrested and imprisoned for upwards of 3 decades for something so simple as camping or hanging out in a park. I mean, it's terrifying, but also like it's just as scary to not stand up to it and let it happen.